My video on the identity, inverse, and multiplicative property of zero properties. So we're going to start with the identity property. And identity property, when you're adding zero, you get the same thing. So horse plus 0 equals horse. Or it also works with multiplication. Horse times 1 still equals horse. So I want you to think of a mirror reflection. Because when you look into a mirror, you're going to see yourself, not someone else. So when 0 is added to any number, the result is always that number. This is called the additive identity property. So whenever we add 0, we're going to get the exact same number. So look at example 1. 1/2 plus 0 equals 1/2. Negative a plus 0 equals negative a. And 5 plus 0 equals 5. So in all three of these cases, I added 0 and got the same exact number. Okay, moving along. When 1 is multiplied to any number, the result is always that number. This is called the multiplicative identity property. So anytime we multiply by a number by 1, we're going to get the exact same number. So example 1, negative 3 times 1 equals negative 3. 1/2 times 1 equals 1/2. Negative a times 1 equals negative a. Okay, let's turn the page. And now we're going to look at the inverse property. So this one says x times 1 over x equals 1. So I want you to think reciprocal, because this is a reciprocal here. So we're going to think reciprocal to remember to flip it. Reciprocal. Now this one is adding opposites, so x plus negative x equals 0, so we're going to think opposites. When opposites are added together, the result is always 0. This is called the additive inverse property. So you can take a number and its opposite, add it together, and you're always going to get 0. So 8 plus negative 8 equals 0. Negative x plus x equals 0. So even though I'm using variables, still the same thing, equals 0. And 1/2 plus blank equals 0. So what's the opposite of 1/2? Negative 1/2. Okay, let's move on to the multiplicative inverse property. So the product of a number and its reciprocal is always 1. Remember, reciprocal is the flip of a number. This is called the multiplicative inverse property. So when you multiply a number by its flip, you will always get 1. For example, 7 times 1 over 7 equals 1, because these are flips of each other. A times 1 over a equals 1. Again, they're flips of each other. Now 1 over 8, I need to flip it because I know the answer is 1. So I know I got multiplied by its reciprocal. The reciprocal of 1 over 8 is 8 over 1, so we usually just say 8, because 8 divided by 1 is 8. Now, number 4, 9 times its flip equals 1. So I can remember, back to 6th grade, I can put a 1 underneath. 9 divided by 1 is the same as 9. And now if I flip that, I get 1 over 9. So 9 times 1 over 9 equals 1. And these two numbers, when multiplied together, always give you 1. So, if the number sentence is true, then y is the blank. So first of all, let's figure out what y is. 1/7 times blank still equals 1/7. So that must mean that y equals 1. And if I'm multiplying by 1, that is the multiplicative identity property, which is an example of the additive inverse property. Remember, we learned above that additive inverse is adding opposites, so look down your list and see which one is adding opposites. Hopefully you're thinking choice D. Turn the page and let's look at multiplicative property of 0. Okay, this is probably the easiest of all the properties. A times 0 equals 0. So the multiplicative property says multiplying by 0 gives you an answer of 0 every time. So think multiply by 0. You can also think of it as the donut property because the donut looks like a 0. So example 1 says 5 times 0 equals 0. 0 times -4 equals 0. And AB times 0 also equals 0. So now we have to finish these. 94 times 0 equals 0. 0 times 1 and 37/100ths is 0. And k times 0 is also 0. Now let's look at the application. It says circle the step where the multiplicative property of 0 is applied. So we're looking for multiplying by 0 and the result equals 0. So if I look at this first example, I see it right here. 6 times 0 got replaced with a 0. If I look at example 2 on this side, same thing, I'm looking for multiplying by 0, and I see 3 times 0 equals 0. So the product of any number and 0 is always 0. Okay, if you want to try this next page on your own, then go ahead and pause the video and turn it back on when you're finished, and you can see how you did. So we're going to use the word bank to name the property illustrated by each mathematical statement. Okay, 0 plus -4 equals -4. So I added 0 and got the exact same thing. So this is the additive identity. Example number 2. A times B plus 0 still equals A times B. So once again, I added 0 and got the exact same thing. So again, this is the additive identity. Example number 3 says x times 1 over x equals 1. So I multiplied by the flip of x and got an answer of 1. So this is multiplicative inverse. And the reason being, I multiplied the reciprocal of x and got an answer of 1. Number 4 says 15 times 0 equals 0. So this is the multiplicative property of 0. And I'm going to use the number 0 instead of the word 0. Example number 5 says y times 1 still equals y. So I multiplied by 1 and I still got the same letter. So that is the multiplicative identity. Okay, let's look at the last 5 examples. Number 6 says 17 plus 0 still equals 17. So I added 0 and got the exact same thing. This is the additive identity. Example number 7, 0 equals negative 3 plus 3. This is backwards of how it would normally look, but since we're adding two opposites together and we get 0, that is the additive inverse. Additive inverse. Number 8, negative 3 times negative 1 over 3. Now notice I multiplied by its reciprocal and I got an answer of 1. So that must be the multiplicative inverse. Number 9 says 2 times 1/2 equals 1. So notice 2 and 1/2 are reciprocals. So we once again use the multiplicative inverse. And the last example, number 10. G times 0 equals 0, so I multiplied by 0 and got an answer of 0, so that is multiplicative property of 0. Okay, that concludes our notes on identity, inverse, and multiplicative property of 0. I hope you have a great day.